I was standing in my driveway, holding a cup of coffee that was rapidly losing its heat, staring at a woman who was pointing a manicured finger at a flower. Not just any flower. A grandiflora rose, specifically a Queen Elizabeth pink that I had spent the better part of 3 years coaxing into a state of vibrant, award-winning perfection. And the woman pointing at it wasn't just any woman. She was Mrs. Higgins. Mrs. Higgins was the treasurer, secretary, and self-appointed sheriff of the Willow Creek Estates Homeowners Association. She was a woman who didn't just follow rules, she weaponized them. She was the type of person who knew the exact decibel level of a sneeze and had strong opinions on the moral implications of beige versus taupe siding. "Mark?" she said. Her voice sounded like a chainsaw cutting through styrofoam. "Do you see the problem here?" I took a sip of my lukewarm coffee. I looked at the rosebush. It was glorious. It was about 7 feet tall, a cascading fountain of green leaves and soft pink blooms that smelled like heaven and looked like a painting. "No, Mrs. Higgins," I said, keeping my voice level. "I see a plant, a very healthy plant. Is it photosynthesizing too loudly for you?" She didn't smile. Mrs. Higgins had never smiled in her life. Rumor had it her face muscles had atrophied from decades of scowling at garbage cans left out past 6 p.m. on Tuesdays. "Don't be facetious," she snapped. She took a step forward. She was wearing her signature uniform, a floral blouse that clashed with the actual flowers, khaki capris, and sensible sneakers designed for power walking over to people's houses to ruin their day. She raised her other hand. In it, she held a metal tape measure. She extended the tape with a sharp zip-click sound. She held it up to the edge of the rose bush, then looked down at the pavement. "It is encroaching," she declared. "It's a bush, Mrs. Higgins. They grow. That's what they do." "It is encroaching," she repeated, "on the visual harmony of the street. But that is not the primary issue today, Mark. The issue is the nature of the growth." I blinked. "The nature of the growth?" "It's aggressive," she said. I looked at the roses. They were swaying gently in the morning breeze. A bumblebee landed on one, collected some pollen, and buzzed off happily. It was the least aggressive thing I had ever seen. "Aggressive," I repeated. "Are we looking at the same plant? Did one of them hiss at you? Did a thorny branch try to steal your wallet?" "Look at the silhouette!" She gestured wildly, slicing the air with her hand. "It's all sharp angles. It's jagged. It looms. When I sit in my breakfast nook," she pointed across the street to her house, a pristine, joyless box of gray vinyl siding. "I look out my window, and I see this monstrosity towering over the sidewalk. It looks violent. It disturbs the feng shui of the entire cul-de-sac." I almost choked on my coffee. "Feng shui? Mrs. Higgins, you tried to ban wind chimes last month because they were auditory litter. Since when do you care about feng shui?" "I care about property values, Mark, and having a wild, untamed jungle across the street sends a message that this neighborhood is in decline. It looks like a drug den." I looked at my freshly mowed lawn. I looked at my power-washed driveway. I looked at my Honda Civic washed and waxed in the drive. "A drug den? Because of roses?" "It's the vibe," she insisted, using a word I was 100% sure she didn't understand. "It projects hostility, botanical aggression. I've had complaints." "From who?" I asked. "The bees?" "From me," she said, narrowing her eyes. "I am filing a formal citation. You have distinct instructions. Fix the silhouette. Make it friendly. Make it soft. Or remove it." She retracted the tape measure with a violent snap, turned on her heel, and marched back across the street. I watched her go, feeling the familiar tightening in my chest that only the HOA could induce. Botanical aggression, I muttered to myself. Unbelievable. 2 days later, the letter arrived. I knew what it was before I even opened it. The envelope was a heavy, cream-colored stock with the Willow Creek Estates crest embossed in gold leaf. A crest that depicted a willow tree that didn't actually exist in the neighborhood because the developer had cut them all down to build condos. I walked into my kitchen, tossed the mail on the granite island, and grabbed a beer. It was 5:00 p.m. on a Friday. I worked in data analytics, which meant I spent 40 hours a week staring at spreadsheets and finding patterns in chaos. I liked logic. I liked cause and effect. The HOA was the enemy of logic. I ripped the envelope open. Inside was a single sheet of paper, signed by the board, which was mostly just Mrs. Higgins and 2 other retirees she had bullied into submission. Notice of violation. Landscaping Code 14.2. B. Recipient: Mark D. Reynolds. Address: 402 Oak Lane. Description of violation: excessively angular and threatening vegetation. Front yard rose bushes, Rosa grandiflora, exceed the permissible visual noise limits and present an aggressive silhouette, inconsistent with the neighborhood aesthetic guidelines. Remediation required. Homeowner must modify the silhouette of the vegetation to conform to soft, welcoming, and non-threatening standards. Failure to comply within 7 days will result in a daily fine of $500 and potential forced removal of the vegetation at the homeowner's expense. Deadline: August 24th. I stared at the paper. $500 a day. Threatening vegetation, I read aloud. I looked out my kitchen window at the roses. They were glowing orange in the sunset. They looked about as threatening as a basket of puppies. I slammed the beer down. I wasn't going to take this. I had spent thousands of dollars on soil amendments, organic fertilizers, and specialized pruning tools. Those roses were the only thing keeping me sane in this sterile, cookie-cutter hellscape. I grabbed the letter and marched out the front door. I crossed the street to Mrs. Higgins' house. Her lawn was perfect. Terrifyingly perfect. The grass was cut to exactly 2 inches. There wasn't a single weed. It looked like a billiard table. I rang the doorbell. It played a cheerful electronic melody that sounded distinctly like It's a Small World. Mrs. Higgins opened the door. She was wearing an apron that said "Kiss the Cook," which was ironic because I was pretty sure she subsisted entirely on vinegar and spite. "Mark," she said. She didn't open the screen door. "I got your letter," I said, holding it up. "This is a joke, right? $500 a day?" "The bylaws are clear regarding upkeep and aesthetics," she said calmly. "It's not about upkeep. The bushes are healthy. You're fining me because you don't like the shape?" "I'm fining you because it looks dangerous," she said. "It's too sharp. It projects anger. We are a family-friendly community, Mark. We want softness. We want curves. We want things that make children feel safe, not things that look like they're going to grab them." "It's a plant!" I shouted, losing my cool. "It doesn't have sentient intent." "Lower your voice," she hissed, "or I'll write you up for a noise violation too." I took a deep breath. I tried to find the logic. I tried to find the human being inside the cardigan. "Mrs. Higgins, please. I've worked so hard on those. Just tell me what you want. Specifically, do you want me to trim the tops, round the edges?" She sighed, as if explaining quantum physics to a toddler. "I want you to change the energy, Mark. Just make them look friendly. Is that so hard? Make them soft. Make them something that makes me smile when I drink my herbal tea. If you can't do that, cut them down." She closed the door. The lock clicked. I stood there on her porch, staring at the wood grain. Make them friendly. Make them soft. Make her smile. I turned around to walk back to my house. My blood was boiling. I was imagining all sorts of things I could do. I could salt her earth. I could paint my house neon pink. But all of those would get me sued or arrested. As I walked back down her driveway, I glanced at the neighbor's house next door to mine. The Johnsons. They had a 4-year-old kid. The kid had left a toy on the lawn. It was a teddy bear. A giant, plush, golden-brown teddy bear. It was slumped against their mailbox, its button eyes staring blankly at the street, a permanent, stitched smile on its face. I stopped. I looked at the bear. It was soft. It was friendly. It was undeniably the most non-threatening shape in the universe. I looked at my rose bushes. They were tall, thick, and dense. Plenty of biomass to work with. A slow, cold grin spread across my face. "Friendly," I whispered. "She wants friendly." I pulled out my phone. I didn't search for landscaper. I searched for something much more specific. Topiary artist. Avant-garde. Experimental. If Mrs. Higgins wanted a smile, I was going to give her a smile she would see in her nightmares. I spent that Friday night drinking IPAs and diving into the weirdest corners of the horticultural internet. Most landscapers were boring. Their websites featured pictures of freshly mulched flower beds and neatly trimmed hedges. "We mow, you grow." Bob's Lawn Care. I didn't want Bob. Bob would ask questions. Bob would try to be reasonable. I needed an artist. I needed a visionary. I needed someone who looked at a shrub and saw a soul trapped in cellulose. By 11:00 p.m., I found him. The website was entirely black. No text at first, just the sound of wind howling through trees. Then, slowly, white letters faded onto the screen in a Gothic font. Sven's sculptural greenery, liberating the leaf, tormenting the twig. I clicked portfolio. It wasn't lawns. It was madness. There were hedges shaped like gargoyles. There was a privet bush shaped like a weeping angel. There was an entire row of cypress trees trimmed to look like a giant hand reaching out of the earth. Under the About Me section, there was a photo of a man who looked like a cross between a vampire and a lumberjack. He was wearing welding goggles and holding a chainsaw. The caption read, "Nature is chaos. I am the order. I am Sven." I dialed the number. It was late, but I had a feeling Sven wasn't a 9 to 5 kind of guy. It rang once. "Speak," a voice answered. It was deep, accented, and sounded like it was coming from the bottom of a well. "Is this Sven?" I asked. "That depends," the voice said. "Are you looking for a trim, or are you looking for a resurrection?" "I'm looking for revenge," I said. There was a pause on the line. Then a rustling sound, like leather shifting. "I am listening." Sven arrived the next morning at 9:00 a.m. sharp. I was waiting in the driveway. When his vehicle pulled around the corner, I knew I had made the right choice. He drove a 1980s Cadillac hearse, painted a matte forest green. The license plate read, "Prune It." He parked in front of my house, blocking my mailbox. The driver's door creaked open, and Sven emerged. He was taller than he looked on the internet, at least 6'4", lanky but wired with muscle. He wore black cargo pants with more pockets than seemed legally distinct, a black tank top that showed off arms covered in vine tattoos, and a tool belt that looked like it belonged to a medieval torturer. He had specialized shears holstered on his thighs. He didn't say hello. He walked past me, straight to the rose bushes. He stood inches away from them, breathing deeply. "Grandiflora," he whispered. "Old growth, thick canes, much suffering in these roots." Yeah," I said, walking up behind him. "They're pretty sturdy." Sven turned to me. He took off his sunglasses. His eyes were an intense, unsettling blue. "Why do you summon me? These plants are healthy. They have spirit. See that house?" I pointed across the street. Mrs. Higgins' blinds were twitching. I knew she was watching. She was always watching. "The beige box of despair?" Sven asked. "That's the one. The woman who lives there, Mrs. Higgins, says these roses are aggressive. She says they have a violent silhouette. She fined me." Sven scoffed. It was a wet, dismissive sound. "She fears the wild. She fears the truth of the thorn." "She told me to modify them," I continued. "She specifically ordered me to make them friendly. She wants soft. She wants something that makes her smile." Sven looked at the roses, then back at Mrs. Higgins's house. He cracked his knuckles. "And what do you want, Mark?" "I want to give her exactly what she asked for," I said. "I want you to turn these 3 bushes into giant, smiling teddy bears. I want them to be the softest, cuddliest, most aggressively friendly things she has ever seen. I want them to stare into her kitchen window while she eats her toast. Can you do that?" Sven was silent for a long moment. He looked at the bushes. He seemed to be doing complex geometry in his head. He reached out and touched a cane, ignoring the thorn that pricked his thumb. A single drop of blood welled up. He didn't flinch. "Teddy bears," he mused. "A symbol of childhood innocence, corrupted by the permanence of wood, a subversive masterpiece of sugary defiance." He turned to me, a manic grin spreading across his face. "We will not just make them bears, Mark. We will make them gods of plush. We will make them 8 feet tall. We will use the Rosa floribunda for the belly fur to create texture contrast. We will graft. We will weave." "Is it possible?" I asked. "Within 48 hours? The deadline is Monday." "For money, anything is possible," Sven said. "But for spite? For spite, I work faster." We went inside to sign the paperwork. Sven sat at my kitchen table, which suddenly looked very fragile beneath his elbows. He produced a contract that looked like it was written on parchment. "The cost," he said, scribbling a number. I looked at it. It was $4,000. I flinched. That was my vacation fund. That was my new transmission fund. "It is a lot," Sven admitted, "but you are paying for the artistry. And the hazard pay. Roses bite back." "Do it," I said. "But first, we need to check the rules. I can't have her tearing them down on a technicality." I pulled up the HOA bylaws on my laptop. Sven leaned in, smelling faintly of pine needles and gasoline. "Here," I pointed. "Section 14, Structural Restrictions. No permanent structures, statues, or artificial lawn ornaments exceeding 6 feet in height are permitted in the front yard." "Ah," Sven said. "Problem." "No," I smiled. "Read carefully. Structures, statues, or artificial lawn ornaments. These aren't statues. They are living plants. Look at section 14.2. Vegetation and landscaping must be well maintained. Trees and shrubs must be trimmed to prevent obstruction of sidewalks. There is no height limit on bushes, I said. Only obstruction rules. And as long as the bears are standing in the yard, not over the sidewalk, she can't touch them on height. Sven nodded, impressed. You have the soul of a lawyer, but the heart of a chaotician. And color, I scrolled down. Exterior home colors must be earth tones, no bright neon or unnatural colors. Roses are natural, Sven said. Red, pink, white. We stay within the palette of Gaia. Exactly. She can't say a pink flower is an unnatural color. Sven stood up. He offered me his hand. It was rough, calloused, and covered in small scars. I will bring the crew tomorrow at dawn, Sven said. Prepare yourself, Mark. The noise of creation is loud. Let it be loud, I said, shaking his hand. Let her hear it. As Sven walked out to his hearse, I saw Mrs. Higgins open her front door. She stepped out, pretending to sweep her porch, craning her neck to see the strange man in leather pants leaving my house. Sven stopped by his hearse. He looked directly at her. He slowly put on his sunglasses. Then he revved the engine of the hearse, a deep, guttural roar that rattled her windows, and peeled out of the cul-de-sac. I stood in the doorway and waved at her. She scowled and went back inside. Enjoy the silence while it lasts, Mrs. Higgins, I thought, because the bears are coming. Sunday morning. 7:00 a.m. In Willow Creek Estates, Sunday mornings were sacred. It was a time for silence, for reading the paper, and for judging your neighbor's lawn care habits from behind sheer curtains. The loudest sound was usually the chirping of a robin or the distant hum of a sleek, electric Tesla. That changed the moment Sven arrived. He didn't come alone this time. He brought the cavalry. The hearse rolled in, followed closely by a battered white van that looked like it had survived a war zone. It was rust-spotted and had Sven's spray-painted on the side in red, dripping letters. I was drinking coffee on the porch, waiting for the show. 2 assistants hopped out of the van. They looked like Sven's clones, only smaller and wirier. One was named Lars. The other was terrifyingly just named Blade. They were dressed in matching black overalls and carried spools of heavy-gauge wire like ammunition bandoliers. "Deploy the armatures!" Sven shouted. His voice boomed through the quiet cul-de-sac. "The roses await their metamorphosis!" Then came the sound. It wasn't just chainsaws. It was industrial chainsaws. The kind used to clear-cut portions of the Amazon. Sven fired up the first one. A massive orange beast with a bar as long as my leg. Vrrrr, rum, rum, rum. The sound tore through the morning air like a physical blow. Birds scattered from the trees. A squirrel fell off the power line in shock. Across the street, the inevitable happened. The front door of 403 flew open so hard, I thought it would come off the hinges. Mrs. Higgins emerged. She wasn't in her usual power-walking attire. She was in a pink chenille bathrobe and fuzzy slippers, her hair in curlers. She looked like a rage-filled stick of cotton candy. "What is happening?" she screamed. She was shouting, but I could barely hear her over the idle rumble of 3 chainsaws. She marched to the edge of her lawn, waving her arms. I walked down my driveway, putting on a pair of heavy-duty ear defenders. I lifted one ear cup as she approached the property line. "Good morning, Mrs. Higgins," I shouted cheerfully. "Have you lost your mind?" she shrieked, pointing at Sven, who was currently measuring a rose cane with a caliper while revving the saw. "It's 7:05 on a Sunday. The noise ordinance says strictly state construction and landscaping permitted between 7 o'clock a.m. and 8 o'clock p.m., I shouted back, citing Section 8.4 of the bylaws, which I had memorized the night before. "I'm just getting an early start. Gotta meet that deadline you gave me." "This isn't landscaping, this is industrial warfare." "I'm modifying the silhouette," I yelled, gesturing to Sven. "I hired a specialist. You said the angles were too sharp. We're softening them up." Sven chose that moment to attack the first bush. He didn't just cut. He lunged. Leaves and thorns exploded into the air. It looked less like pruning and more like a scene from Texas Chainsaw Massacre. The Garden Edition. Mrs. Higgins turned pale. "He's killing them! You're destroying the property value." "Trust the process." I gave her a thumbs up. "It's going to be very friendly." She stood there for another minute, her mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water, unable to compete with the decibels. Finally, she clamped her hands over her ears and ran back inside. I put my ear cup back down. Sven caught my eye and winked. By 10 a.m., the major demolition was done. The rose bushes, which had previously been tall, fountain-like sprays of green, were now reduced to dense, rough columns. They looked terrible. If Mrs. Higgins thought they were ugly before, they were now objectively hideous. But then came the delivery. A flatbed truck rumbled up the street. It was a specialized metal fabrication company I'd called on Sven's orders. The driver, a guy named Mike, who looked like he ate nails for breakfast, hopped out. He was wearing a welding mask on top of his head. "Delivery for Mark?" Mike looked at his clipboard, then at the house. "I got 3 Ursa Major internal support frames?" "That's me," I said. Mike walked around to the back of the truck and unlatched the gate. "This is a weird one, buddy. Usually we do rebar for foundations. My boss said you wanted bear skeletons?" "Bear skeletons," I confirmed. Mike dragged the first one off the truck. It was a masterpiece of wire mesh and steel rods. It was shaped vaguely like a sitting teddy bear, but without the fur, it looked like a robot Terminator. It was 8 feet tall. "Where do you want 'em?" "Right over the bushes," I said. "We're going to thread the plants through them." Mike paused. He looked at the mutilated rose bushes. He looked at Sven, who was currently meditating in the mulch. He looked at me. "You got a war going on with a neighbor?" Mike asked, grinning. "How did you know?" "Nobody buys 3 steel bear skeletons unless they're trying to send a message. I had a guy once order a 20-foot metal rooster just to block his neighbor's view of the sunset. I respect the hustle." We unloaded the frames. It took all 4 of us, me, Sven, Lars, and Blade, to hoist the metal cages over the rose bushes. We had to be careful not to snap the main canes. Once the frames were in place, the real work began. This was where Sven proved he was worth the $4 grand. He wasn't just a gardener. He was a surgeon. He and his assistants spent the next 4 hours on their knees, weaving the flexible rose canes through the wire mesh. They used soft twine to tie the branches in place, forcing the plant to conform to the steel skeleton. It was painstaking work. Every time a branch snapped, Sven would curse in a language that sounded like ancient Norse. "Gentle, Lars, gentle," Sven scolded his assistant. "Treat the cane like a lover, not a crowbar. You must coax it into the armpit of the bear." "The thorns are sharp, master," Lars whimpered. "Pain is the price of beauty," Sven shouted. By 2 p.m., the shapes were forming. You could see it. The bottom bush was fluffed out to form the legs and belly. The middle section was cinched tight for the torso. The top was being carefully sculpted into a large, round head. I was standing on the sidewalk, admiring the emerging rotundity of the belly, when a police cruiser rolled up. It was Officer Miller. I knew Miller. He was a 20-year veteran of the force who had responded to the time Mrs. Higgins called 911 because a kid was selling lemonade without a permit. He looked tired. He parked the cruiser and walked up the driveway slowly, hitching up his belt. He didn't look at me. He looked at the 8-foot wire cages filled with leaves. "Afternoon, Mark," Miller said. "Officer Miller," I nodded. "To what do I owe the pleasure?" "Guess," he said. "We got a call. Anonymous, of course. Report of ritualistic structures being erected. Also a noise complaint. Also something about pagan symbols threatening the moral fabric of the community." I laughed. "Pagan symbols? It's a garden project." Miller squinted at the wire frames. Sven was currently inside one of the cages, his head sticking out of the bear's stomach area, tying a branch. Is that a person inside the bush?" Miller asked. "That's Sven," I said. "He's an artist." Sven poked his head out further. He was wearing his welding goggles. "The plant accepts the bond," he declared to no one in particular. Miller sighed. He took off his cap and rubbed his forehead. "Mark, look, I don't care what you do with your bushes, but she's called dispatch 3 times in the last hour. She's claiming you're building a siege tower." "It's not a siege tower," I said. "It's topiary. Mrs. Higgins sent me a formal violation notice telling me to change the silhouette of my bushes. She wanted them friendly. I'm just complying with her request." Miller looked closer at the frame. He tilted his head. He saw the round ears. He saw the chubby legs. "Is that—" Miller started to smile. "Is that a teddy bear?" "It's a snuggle bear, actually," I corrected. "3 of them. The Snuggle Squad." Miller started to chuckle. The chuckle turned into a full-blown laugh. He shook his head. "You're messing with her." "Malicious compliance, officer. Perfectly legal." "Is it over 6 feet?" "It's vegetation," I said. "No height limit on vegetation in the bylaws. I checked." Miller looked at Mrs. Higgins' house. He could see the curtains moving. "All right," Miller said, putting his cap back on. "I'm going to mark this as unfounded. But do me a favor, keep the chainsaw noise down after 6 p.m. I really don't want to come back here today." "You have my word," I said. Miller walked back to his car. As he opened the door, he yelled back, "Make sure you give them nice smiles." I gave him a salute. "The friendliest smiles you've ever seen." The sun began to set, casting long, distorted shadows across the lawn. The bodies of the bears were finished. They were thick, lush, and incredibly dense. Sven had used a technique called pleaching to weave the branches so tight that you couldn't see the wire frame anymore. They looked like solid walls of green fur, but they were faceless. "Now," Sven whispered, opening a special cooler he had brought from the van. "The soul." He pulled out bundles of roses, but these weren't from my bushes. These were grafts. Sven had brought scions, cuttings from other rose varieties. "For the eyes," Sven said, holding up a bundle of black baccarat roses. They were a deep, dark red, almost black. "We graft these into the sockets. When they bloom, the eyes will be dark voids of passion." "And the mouth?" I asked. Sven pulled out a bundle of iceberg roses, pure, stark white. "We graft the white in a crescent shape," Sven said, tracing a curve in the air. A wide, toothy grin. It will take a few weeks for the flowers to bloom fully, but for now, the white buds will create the outline. It will be striking. Do it, I said. They worked under floodlights now. The neighborhood was dark. Mrs. Higgins' house was pitch black, but I knew she was in there, probably writing a manifesto. Sven and his team worked with surgical precision. They sliced into the canes of the head area and spliced in the new colors. They wired them tight. Then came the pièce de résistance. The mechanics, Sven said. Wait, mechanics? I asked. I thought this was all natural. It is, Sven said. But nature reacts to wind. We have left the neck canes slightly longer, slightly looser on the frame. We have attached a small, flat, wooden paddle to the back of the head, hidden in the foliage. What does that do? Aerodynamics, Sven smiled, his teeth glinting in the floodlight. When the wind blows from the north, which it does every morning, it will catch the paddle. The head is counterweighted. It will not just sit there. He mimicked a motion with his hand, a slow, rhythmic nodding. It will agree, Sven whispered. The bear will nod. It will say, yes, Mrs. Higgins, yes. I felt a shiver go down my spine. It was diabolical. It was perfect. You're a genius, Sven. I am merely a humble servant of the chlorophyll, he said, wiping sweat sap from his forehead. By midnight, they were done. We covered the bears with massive canvas tarps, not to protect them, but to hide the surprise. I wanted the reveal to be sudden. I wanted it to be traumatic. Sven packed up his tools. He looked exhausted but satisfied. Do not water them tomorrow, he instructed. Let the sap harden. On Monday morning, remove the tarps. The shock will be significant. He climbed into his hearse. I will send you the invoice for the overtime. Worth every penny, I said. I stood on the porch looking at the 3 massive tarp-covered lumps on my lawn. They looked like body bags for giants. I went inside, but I couldn't sleep. I felt like a kid on Christmas Eve. Except instead of Santa coming, I was about to unleash 3 8-foot plant monsters on a retiree. Monday. The deadline. The citation stated I had to be in compliance by 8:00 a.m. I set my alarm for 6:45. I showered, shaved, and put on my best responsible homeowner outfit, a polo shirt and khakis. I wanted to look sane. I wanted the contrast between my appearance and my lawn to be jarring. I made a pot of coffee and walked out the front door at 7:55 a.m. The neighborhood was waking up. Cars were pulling out of driveways as people headed to work. A few neighbors slowed down as they passed my house, eyeing the massive tarps. At 7:58, the front door of 403 opened. Mrs. Higgins stepped out. She was holding a clipboard. She was ready to inspect. She was ready to issue the $500 fine. She walked to the edge of the street, her pen poised like a dagger. "Good morning, Mark," she called out. Her voice dripped with victory. "I see you've covered up the eyesores. Does this mean you're removing them?" I walked down the driveway, stopping right next to the first tarp. "Not removing, Mrs. Higgins," I shouted, ensuring the neighbors pulling out of their driveways could hear. "Refining. You asked for friendly. You asked for soft. You asked for a silhouette that would make you smile." "Well," she tapped her foot. "Let's see it. If it's still aggressive, I'm writing the ticket right now." I grabbed the corner of the first tarp. "Ladies and gentlemen," I announced to the empty air and the Johnsons across the street who were loading their kids into a minivan. I give you the Snuggle Squad. I yanked the tarp. It slid off with a heavy whoosh. The first bear was revealed. It was shocking. Even I, who had watched it being built, wasn't prepared for the reality of it in the daylight. It was massive, 8 feet of dense, thorny green leaves compacted into the undeniable shape of a teddy bear. It had a fat, round belly. It had stubby, paw-like arms raised in a permanent hug gesture. But it was the face that froze the blood. The black baccarat roses hadn't bloomed yet, so the eyes were 2 dark, tight buds, looking like beady little pupils staring directly across the street. The iceberg white roses for the mouth were partially open, creating a jagged, toothy white line that curved up in a maniacal grin. Because the leaves were rose leaves, they were serrated. The bear looked fuzzy from a distance, but up close, it looked like it was made of thousands of tiny knives. "Oh my God," Mrs. Johnson whispered from her minivan. Her kids were pressed against the glass, eyes wide. "Wait!" I yelled. "There's more!" I ran to the second tarp. Whoosh! Bear number 2. This one was slightly taller and leaning forward, as if interested in a conversation. I ran to the third tarp. Whoosh! Bear number 3. This one was the leader. It was positioned closest to the street. Its grin seemed wider than the others. They stood in a phalanx, facing Mrs. Higgins's breakfast nook. 3 giant, green, thorny, grinning monsters. Mrs. Higgins dropped her clipboard. It clattered onto the pavement. "What?" she choked out. "What is that?" "It's a teddy bear," I beamed. "It's the universal symbol of comfort. Look at the curves, Mrs. Higgins. No sharp angles, just round, chubby, organic shapes. Isn't it friendly?" It's horrible," she whispered. "Horrible?" I feigned shock. "Who hates teddy bears? Are you saying you hate hugs, Mrs. Higgins?" Just then, a gust of wind blew down the street. The mechanics kicked in. The head of the middle bear, leader bear, shifted. It tilted forward slowly, then rocked back. It nodded. Creak, swish. Mrs. Higgins took a step back. "It moved." "It's nodding in agreement," I said. "It loves your outfit." The wind picked up. Now all 3 bears were nodding. Not in unison, but in a chaotic, disjointed rhythm. Nod. Wobble. Nod. It looked like they were muttering to each other. Plotting. "Make it stop!" Mrs. Higgins shrieked. "I can't control the wind, Karen." I slipped and used her internet name. "I mean, Mrs. Higgins. It's nature. It's the feng shui of the breeze." By now, traffic had stopped. A delivery truck had pulled over. People were getting out of their cars to take pictures. Mrs. Higgins was hyperventilating. She marched, stumbled toward me, stopping at the property line. "This is harassment," she yelled, her face turning a shade of purple that matched her petunias. "This is targeted harassment. You built monsters to stare at me." "I built bears," I corrected. "You said the old bushes looked aggressive. I hired a world-renowned artist to shape them into the softest thing in existence. If you find a teddy bear threatening, Mrs. Higgins, that's something you might need to discuss with a therapist." "It has teeth," she pointed at the white rosebuds. "Those are smiles, white roses for purity and joy." "It's mocking me." She turned to the gathering crowd of neighbors. "Do you see this? He's mocking the association." Mr. Henderson, who lived 2 doors down and had been fined last week for leaving his garbage can out for an extra hour, walked up. He looked at the bears. He looked at Mrs. Higgins. "I don't know, Martha," Henderson said, suppressing a grin. "They look pretty friendly to me. My grandkids would love these." "Shut up, Bob," she snapped. She pulled out her phone. Her hands were shaking. "I'm calling the police. I'm calling the city. I'm calling everyone." "Go ahead," I said, crossing my arms and leaning against the leg of Bear No. 1. I patted its thorny thigh. "Officer Miller and I are already acquainted with the project." She didn't just call the police. She called 911 and screamed that she was being menaced by botanical giants. 20 minutes later, Officer Miller rolled up again. But because of the nature of the call, menaced, he brought backup. A second cruiser arrived with lights flashing. Out stepped Officer Miller, looking even more tired than yesterday, and a young, fresh-faced officer who looked like he was 12. This was the Rookie. They walked up the driveway. The crowd of neighbors parted like the Red Sea. Mrs. Higgins ran to them. "Arrest him! Look at it! It's psychological warfare!" The Rookie stopped dead in his tracks. He looked up at the 8-foot bears. The wind caught the leader bear, and it slowly nodded at the Rookie. The Rookie's hand drifted toward his taser, then dropped. "What in the—" "Officer Miller," I smiled. "Welcome back. Meet the Snuggle Squad. Finished ahead of schedule." Miller stared. He walked up to the bear. He touched a leaf. He looked at the white rose teeth. He looked at the counterweighted head swaying in the breeze. He put his hand over his mouth. His shoulders started to shake. "Officer!" Mrs. Higgins shrieked. "Why are you laughing? This is a code violation. It's a threat. It's obscene." Miller composed himself. He cleared his throat. "Ma'am, how is it obscene? It's a bear." "It's looking at me," she pointed to her window. "I can't eat my oatmeal. It's staring into my soul." Miller turned to me. "Mark, are they permanent structures?" "Nope," I said. "Living plants? Roots in the ground? Just a very specific pruning style. No height limit on shrubs, remember?" Miller turned to the Rookie. "Check the code book. Section 14. The Rookie flipped through a thick binder. He's right, sir. Says vegetation must be maintained. Doesn't specify shape or maximum height unless it blocks the sidewalk. These are set back 10 feet. Miller turned back to Mrs. Higgins. "Ma'am, I can't write a ticket for a bush being ugly, and I can't arrest a man for gardening." "It's not gardening," she yelled. "It's hate speech." "It's a bear," Miller repeated, his voice getting firmer. "If he shaped it into a middle finger, maybe we'd have a public indecency conversation. But it's a bear. It's smiling. Technically, it fits your request to make the yard friendlier." "I will sue," she screamed. "I will take this to the Supreme Court of the HOA." "You do that, ma'am," Miller said. "But right now, this is a civil matter. Police are clearing the scene." Miller motioned to the Rookie. "Let's go, kid." As they walked away, the Rookie pulled out his phone. "Sarge, can I get a picture? The guys at the station aren't going to believe this." "Make it quick," Miller said. The Rookie stood next to the bears. I jumped in the photo, giving a thumbs up. The Rookie snapped it. "Thanks, citizen," the Rookie grinned. That's really something." Mrs. Higgins didn't give up. She stood there on her lawn for another hour, measuring the bears from a distance with a laser rangefinder, muttering about angles of incidence and shadow projection. But the tide had turned. The neighbors were loving it. Cars were honking. A school bus drove by, and the kids went absolutely feral, screaming and pressing their faces against the windows. "It's the bear house!" I heard a kid yell. I went inside to get another cup of coffee. I stood in my living room and looked out the window. From this angle, I could see the backs of the bears. They were like three green guardians, standing between me and the negativity across the street. I watched Mrs. Higgins. She went inside her house. I saw her kitchen blinds close, then her living room blinds, then the upstairs bedroom blinds. For the first time in 10 years, the curtains of 403 were drawn tight. She was hiding. The bears bobbed gently in the wind, keeping their eternal vigil. I took a sip of coffee. It was the best cup of coffee I had ever tasted. But I knew this wasn't over. The HOA board meeting was tomorrow night, and Mrs. Higgins was the treasurer. The Battle of the Bushes had been won, but the war for the neighborhood had just begun. Here is the final installment of the story, covering the climatic legal battle and the satisfying aftermath. The summons arrived on Tuesday afternoon. It wasn't mailed. It was taped to my front door with blue painter's tape, right at eye level. Emergency Board Meeting. Subject: the unauthorized and offensive. Topiary structures at 402 Oak Lane. Location: the cul-de-sac, directly in front of the offending vegetation. Time: Wednesday, 6:00 p.m. I peeled the paper off. Unauthorized and offensive. It sounded like a punk rock album title. I texted Sven, me. The tribunal is meeting tomorrow. Do you have the document? Sven. It is prepared. It is printed on hemp paper. It smells of justice. I spent the rest of the day prepping. I printed out the bylaws. I highlighted sections in 3 different colors. I practiced my innocent homeowner face in the mirror. I wasn't just going to fight this. I was going to dismantle the entire bureaucratic apparatus of the Willow Creek Estates HOA. Wednesday, 6:00 p.m. The sun was beginning to dip, casting long, dramatic shadows from the snuggle squad across the asphalt. The bears looked particularly menacing in the twilight. Their white rose teeth seemed to glow. Mrs. Higgins had set up a card table in the middle of the street. She sat behind it like a judge, flanked by Bob, the HOA president, a man who looked like he wanted to be literally anywhere else on earth, and Susan, the secretary, who was busy taking notes on a legal pad. The neighbors had gathered, and not just a few. The entire block was there. People brought lawn chairs. Someone had brought a cooler. It was the most attended HOA meeting in the history of the subdivision. Order! Mrs. Higgins slammed a gavel onto the flimsy card table. The table shook. This emergency meeting is now in session. She stood up and pointed a trembling finger at the bears behind me. We are here to address the atrocity at 402 Oak Lane, she began. The homeowner, Mr. Reynolds, has deliberately violated the aesthetic integrity of our community. He has erected 3 things that are mocking the sanctity of our neighborhood guidelines. Point of order, I said, raising my hand. You will speak when spoken to, Mrs. Higgins snapped. Actually, Bob the President sighed, rubbing his temples. Robert's Rules of Order say he can make a statement, Martha. Let's just get this over with. I'm missing jeopardy. Mrs. Higgins glared at Bob, then turned back to me. Fine, explain yourself. Why have you turned our street into a carnival sideshow? I walked to the center of the court. I held my binder of bylaws. Mrs. Higgins, fellow neighbors, I began, using my best boardroom voice. I received a citation last week stating that my previous rose bushes had an aggressive silhouette. I was ordered to modify them to be friendly, soft, and welcoming. I was told to make them something that would make a person smile. I gestured to the snuggle squad. The wind picked up, and the leader bear slowly nodded at the crowd. A few neighbors chuckled. I ask you, I continued, is there anything softer than a teddy bear? Is there anything more welcoming? I have complied with the request to the letter. I have removed the sharp angles. I have added curves. I have added smiles. They are monsters! Mrs. Higgins shrieked. She held up a blown-up photo of the bears taken at night with a flash, which admittedly made them look like demons from the underworld. Look at the eyes. They are voids. This is intimidation. It's horticulture, I countered. Since when is a rosebush intimidation? Since you made them 8 feet tall and gave them teeth. They aren't teeth. They are iceberg floribundas. And as for the height, I opened my binder. Section 14.2 states that vegetation has no height limit as long as it does not obstruct the sidewalk. Officer Miller confirmed this yesterday. The bears are 10 feet back from the road. They are legal. Mrs. Higgins turned purple. She leaned over the table. Section 5, Paragraph 3, General Aesthetic Cohesion. No modification shall be made that distracts from the uniform beauty of the neighborhood or causes a nuisance to neighbors. They are a nuisance. They stare at me. I can't sleep. They don't have eyes, Martha, Mr. Henderson yelled from his lawn chair. They're plants. They have souls of malice, she yelled back. Furthermore, Mrs. Higgins said, playing her trump card, there is a clause about artificial statuary. If these things have internal supports, which they do, they are classified as structures. Structures over 6 feet require a permit and board approval. You did not get approval. Therefore, they must come down. Tonight. A hush fell over the crowd. She had me there. The wire frames. Bob looked at me. She's got a point, Mark. If there's metal in there, it's a structure. I smiled. I'm glad you brought that up. I reached into my bag and pulled out the document Sven had given me. It was rolled up in a scroll case. I unrolled it with a flourish. It was thick, textured paper with a wax seal. This, I announced, is a certificate of authenticity and artistic provenance. A what? Higgins asked. These are not structures, I explained. According to County Code 88B, regarding public and private art installations, any piece created by a recognized artist that serves as sculptural expression is protected from HOA aesthetic bylaws under the Freedom of Expression Clause, provided it does not pose a safety hazard. I handed the document to Bob. This certifies that the Snuggle Squad is an original, one-of-a-kind living sculpture created by Sven Wunderbar, a world-renowned topiary artist whose work has been featured in Modern Goth Garden and the Druid's Digest. Destroying this would not only be a crime against culture, but it would also open the HOA to a lawsuit for destruction of fine art valued at... I pointed to the appraisal figure at the bottom. Bob's eyes bugged out. $50,000? That's the estimated value, I lied. It was the number Sven made up. If you force me to cut them down, I will sue the HOA for $50,000 plus emotional damages for the loss of my art. Bob dropped the paper like it was hot. He looked at Mrs. Higgins. Martha, Bob said, we don't have $50,000 in the budget. We spent the reserve fund on the new entrance sign. It's a trick! Mrs. Higgins slammed her hands on the table. It's not art. It's a bush, shaped like a bear. Art is subjective, I said calmly. I move to vote, Mr. Henderson shouted. Who likes the bears? A murmur went through the crowd. I like 'em, said Mrs. Johnson. My kids named them. The middle one is Mr. Prickles. They slow down traffic, another neighbor pointed out. People stop speeding to look at them. It's actually safer." "I think they're hilarious," said the guy who owned the corner house. "And honestly, Martha, you complained about my mailbox color last year, so I'm voting for the Bears just to spite you." "This is not a democracy," Mrs. Higgins screamed. "This is a board decision." Bob stood up. He looked at the angry mob of neighbors. He looked at the $50,000 appraisal. He looked at the Bears, which were currently swaying in unison, as if backing me up. "I'm overruling the citation," Bob said. "What?" Mrs. Higgins gasped. "It's too risky," Bob said. "I'm not getting sued over a plant. And frankly, Martha, they are kind of friendly, in a weird way." Bob banged the gavel. "Citation dismissed. The Bears stay. Meeting adjourned." The crowd erupted in cheers. Someone handed me a beer. Mrs. Higgins stood alone at the card table. She looked small. She looked defeated. She looked up at the Snuggle Squad. The wind blew. The leader bear nodded at her. "Yes, Martha, we are here to stay." She packed up her clipboard in silence and walked back to her house. She didn't power walk. She shuffled. I thought winning the HOA battle was the end of it. I was wrong. 2 days later, the rookie cop's photo leaked. Or maybe it was Mrs. Johnson's kid. Either way, the Snuggle Squad hit the internet. First, it was on the local subreddit. Then, it hit the front page. "Man maliciously complies with HOA, grows giant rose bears." By Friday, there were news vans. A reporter from Channel 5 interviewed me on the lawn. "So, Mark," the reporter asked, gesturing to the blooming behemoths, "what inspired this masterpiece?" "I just wanted to be a good neighbor," I said, straight-faced. "I was told to bring more joy to the community. I think we achieved that." The segment aired nationally. That weekend, the tourists started coming. It became a pilgrimage site. People drove from 3 states away to take selfies with the Snuggle Squad. We had goths, gardeners, and grandmas. Someone left a jar of honey on the sidewalk as an offering. Sven's business exploded. He had to hire 3 more assistants just to keep up with the demand for aggressive whimsy landscaping. He sent me a bottle of cactus wine as a thank you. Life in Willow Creek Estates settled into a new normal. The bears were a permanent fixture. They bloomed in cycles, pink bellies in the spring, red eyes in the summer, white teeth in the fall. In the winter, they were just thorny skeletons, which was arguably even cooler. Mrs. Higgins became a recluse. The blinds at 403 remained drawn. About a month after the hearing, I was out pruning the toes of bear number 3. I heard a door open. Mrs. Higgins walked out. She looked tired. She walked to the edge of her driveway. She didn't have her tape measure. "Mark," she said. "Martha," I nodded. We were on a first-name basis now, mostly because I felt bad for destroying her spirit. She looked up at the bears. The red-black baccarat eyes were in full bloom now. They looked intense. "They're attracting bees," she said, but there was no fire in her voice. It was just an observation. "Roses do that," I said. "The white ones," she pointed to the teeth. "The grin, it's very bright in the moonlight. It reflects into my bedroom." I paused. I looked at the bears. They were terrifying at night. "I can trim the teeth," I offered. "Make the smile a little less manic. Maybe close the mouth a bit?" She looked at me, surprised. "You would do that?" "Sure. I mean, the point was to make them friendly. If they're keeping you up at night, that's not very friendly." She hesitated. Then, for the first time in the 5 years I had lived there, the corners of her mouth twitched upward. It wasn't a smile, exactly. It was a grimace of acceptance. That would be appreciated, she said. And Mark? Yeah? The one on the left, she pointed to the smallest bear. It has aphids. I know. I'm treating it with neem oil tomorrow. She nodded. Good. We can't have pests. It lowers property values. She turned and walked back inside. It was the closest thing to a peace treaty we would ever get. I sat on my porch that evening, drinking a cold beer. The sun was setting, casting a golden glow over the neighborhood. The tourists had gone home. I looked at my creation, the Snuggle Squad. They were ridiculous. They were thorny, monstrous, oversized, and completely out of place in this manicured suburb. And they were perfect. Sven had called them subversive. The HOA called them structures. The internet called them legends. But as I watched the wind catch the head of the leader bear, making it nod slowly at the passing cars, I realized what they really were. They were a monument to the most American of all freedoms, the freedom to be incredibly petty in the face of petty authority. I raised my beer to the bears. Here's to being friendly, I whispered. The bear nodded back.